evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. A Mikmaw community is launching lawsuits after a month of violence, as well as what they see as a lack of response from the RCMP and a lack of protection from the Department of Fisheries. Angel Moore reports.
Hello, Winnipeg. I'm here in Sibäganagati First Nation, where Chief Mike Sack says community members are reeling from the violence over the recent moderate livelihood fisheries. Sack says it doesn't help matters that the RCMP are not charging the people accused of harassing, assaulting, and damaging the property of community members.
I couldn't believe it when I was told that they actually said that they had bigger cases to worry about. And for me, a burning van is not bigger than assaulting one of our Mi'kmaq women. That just speaks volumes.
Over a month ago, Sibäganagati First Nation launched their moderate livelihood fishery, exercising their treaty right to fish. That was met with violence from non-Indigenous fishers who say the lobster stock is at risk. Lawyers are gathering evidence from Sibäganagati community members and are preparing lawsuits.
We've all seen in the last number of years all across Canada that, First Nations people have just been pushed aside, and those cases are just left on a desk until everybody forgets about it, and that's not going to happen here. They're going to be held accountable one way or another.
Sibäganagati Moderate Livelihood Management Plan says since the Mi'kmaq are semi-nomadic, the plan covers the traditional territory of Mi'kma'ki, which includes the province of Nova Scotia. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Sibäganagati First Nation.
A disturbing surveillance video from 2018 was made public this week. It shows a First Nations woman being knocked unconscious by a community safety officer in the northern city of Thompson, Manitoba. The video is prompting calls for an investigation. Brittany Hobson has the story, and a note for our viewers: the video may be disturbing for some.
This security footage from 2 years ago has Indigenous leaders across Canada condemning violence against Indigenous women at the hands of officers. On January 8, 2018, community safety officers in Thompson, Manitoba arrested Janesta Garson for suspicion of public intoxication. When the then 19-year-old First Nations woman was brought to RCMP headquarters, she was told to take off some of her clothing. The video shows Garson remove her belt, and she throws it toward the officers. It then shows one of the officers knock Garson to the ground, where she lays unconscious. Officers then drag Garson into a cell. Rohit Gupta, Garson's lawyer, says there is no excuse for the level of force used.
Regardless of what anyone says, well, she threw a belt at an officer, the proportionate response, for an individual, especially a peace officer, is guided by the criminal code. And the criminal code states when an individual can defend themselves. This is not self-defense.
Garson was later transported to hospital. She was charged with assaulting a peace officer, but that charge was stayed. Garson and Gupta filed a formal complaint against RCMP, but Gupta says officers came to Garson's home asking her to drop the complaint.
She can't be the first person that filed an RCMP complaint and has been pressured into withdrawing these complaints. Again, to even go to that level where we file a complaint and to have no resolution of this and have RCMP officers investigating themselves, I think that, what do I want to see out of this? I want that process to be brought to light.
In January, Garson filed a lawsuit against the RCMP, the City of Thompson, the Attorney General of Canada, and the 2 community safety officers.
When we don't have the checks and balances in place, we again have these rogue cowboy officers running around the north playing cops and robbers.
Gupta says this incident highlights the need to examine the Intoxicated Persons Detention Act. This week, Assistant Commissioner and Commanding Officer of the Manitoba RCMP, Jane McClatchy, released a statement acknowledging there are issues with the Act. We all know a detachment cell block is not the best place to house someone who is intoxicated. However, sometimes there is little other choice. I can assure you that our senior officers are working with the province and partners across the sectors to find solutions that do not involve arresting individuals and placing them in our cells. Meanwhile, regional chiefs from BC and Quebec and Labrador have called for an independent investigation. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Justice advocates in the Yukon are calling on the territorial government to build a women's halfway house. Without one, women looking to transition back into society must leave the Yukon or stay in jail to serve their full sentences. Sarah Connors met with some women who say a halfway house is long overdue.
Mackenzie Joe is from Champagne and Ajax First Nation. She spent 6 years at the Whitehorse Correctional Centre. When she was released in 2014, she says she received no support from the jail to help her transition to the outside and had no halfway house to turn to.
I just got out of jail and was basically thrown right back into society. I didn't have any therapy, no slow transition.
With no way to cope with life outside of jail, Joe turned back to her addictions and voluntarily sent herself back to jail in order to get clean.
It was really hard because you don't have anybody to help teach you how to sleep in a house that's not locked. You don't have anyone to help teach you, just to help you with these things to get back. Just going to an appointment, to have to walk to that appointment for me, to be out in public was so hard. The stress, the anxiety.
Now, Joe is calling on the Yukon Department of Justice to build a halfway house for women in the territory, so Indigenous women like her have a fighting chance to properly transition back into their communities.
If they had something there, it would have been easier for me to connect with my kids. I ended up turning back to my addictions because I was scared. I didn't know how to deal with stuff.
This building in Whitehorse was once both a men and women's halfway house, but due to issues housing both sexes in the same facility, services for women were discontinued here around 15 years ago. Now, men can stay in a supervised residential facility in a former unit of the Whitehorse Correctional Centre, while women are left with nowhere to go.
And it's not just the Yukon. Despite Northern Indigenous women having some of the highest incarceration rates in the country, none of the territories have a proper women's halfway house in place. As a result, women in need of one have been forced to travel down south or, in some cases, remain at correctional facilities until they finish their parole.
Jenny Cunningham is a defense lawyer in Whitehorse and has many Indigenous clients. She also wants to see a halfway house built and says not having one often results in women reoffending.
And then they don't have that transitional release into the community where they want to live, where their children are, where their family is. There just isn't set up here for that. So it's ended up displacing women, and it's also ended up incarcerating women.
She says that not providing women with a proper halfway house is a human rights violation.
There's less women, there's less programs, there's less funding, there's less halfway houses, and it's just based on systemic racism in the justice and correctional system, which is really well documented and in all the reports that have come out recently.
In August, the Yukon Department of Justice issued a request for expressions of interest for supervised community housing for justice-involved women transitioning back into the community. However, they declined to be interviewed for this story. At this time, there's still no word if and when a women's facility will be built in the territory. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
A BC family is desperate for any information on their missing daughter, who vanished after a night out with her sister in Vancouver. Tina House has that story.
This is the last selfie Chelsea Poorman posted to Facebook on Saturday, September the 5th, 2020. It was supposed to be a fun night out with her sister Paige when the two girls decided to go out and have a few drinks at a bar on Granville Street. But within hours, it would turn into a nightmare for the Poorman family.
We went to a bar there, and we went to my friend's place, and then Chelsea left my friend's place close to midnight, and then I called Chelsea to see where she went, and then she didn't really tell me. She didn't tell me anything. I called her again, and then the last conversation I had with her around 1 o'clock, she said that she was with a new babe, and she didn't tell me where. I tried to ask her, but then she hung up on me.
Paige says she continued to call her sister, but her phone was off. It's been over 2 months since her disappearance, and police are trying to figure out who the man was that she was with. But so far, they have no leads. The stress and worry for Chelsea's mom, Sheila, and her other 2 daughters is immense.
I just come home, and I think about her every day.
Police say Chelsea's cell phone last pinged near Hastings Street, but it has now been turned off. And so, like many others before, the poor man family walks on the downtown east side, desperately looking for answers. Her mum says Chelsea is vulnerable and has a brain injury, as well as walks with a noticeable limp. Her left arm is also permanently bent at a 90-degree angle from a car accident.
We got a message from a young lady shortly after we put the posters up and the media went up, and she stated that that weekend that my daughter went missing, there were some individuals that were out there, and they were human traffickers.
This is the last place that 25-year-old Chelsea Poorman was last seen, here on Granville Street, Vancouver's entertainment district. If you know any information about her whereabouts or what may have happened in the early morning hours of September the 6th, you are asked to call your local police. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Time now for a quick break. But coming up, we'll look back on this week's Remembrance Day. Welcome back. Despite the pandemic, there were many ways to commemorate Remembrance Day and Indigenous Veterans Day this past week. But for one man in the Northwest Territories, honoring those who served begins with knowing who they were. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs has this story north of 60.
Floyd Powder aims to give each veteran the recognition they deserve.
Joseph Xavier Powder has served in World War II, so we're confirming the records. But when I checked the CE website, identified where his plot is, so here is his plot. But I did notice that there's several grave plots that don't have a headstone, and they are known veterans. That struck me as that's just not right. So I started getting involved. And
Powder is a researcher with the Last Post Fund, a national charity helping identify Indigenous veterans.
The capital has this happening here, then it likely in the smaller communities which may not have quite the same support or don't have a Legion and those services to support veterans. There's probably other veterans that are not identified.
For the last year and a half, he's been creating a list of the Northwest Territories veterans and connecting with their families, informing them about commemorative services through the Last Post Fund, including headstones with Indigenous markers.
I've been bumping into old-timers or elders in the community, and some of them have been very helpful in identifying family who are here or they have moved somewhere down south, and so I'm trying to be able to track them through them.
The Last Post Fund says to date there's close to 12,000 Indigenous people who have served in the Canadian Armed Forces.
So it's not just sort of about, us going and placing tombstones and then, it's over, but it's much more about working with a local researcher. They know their veterans well.
Born and raised in Fort Smith, NWT, Powder, a proud Métis, served for 32 years and completed 3 peacekeeping tours. He understands the importance of families of veterans getting a more complete story on their loved ones' contributions. He himself is in the process of obtaining his dad's service records from World War II.
Especially for young people from the north, when they're joining the war, or even in the mid-50s, early 60s to join the Canadian Forces, they had to make their way down south to sign up. So how that story coming from leaving home and then going down there, and then enrolling, and how his service came to be. So it'd be good for my my knowledge and also to pass that information on.
So last summer I took my basic parachutist course and got my wings from...
Following in his family's footsteps, Justin Powder says he's excited to see his grandfather's records.
Because I've only heard about all of the stories through my dad, so it would be like another point of view about my grandfather, since I never really learnt too much from himself.
While Powder has traveled most of the southern part of the territory, he's hoping to get to the Beaufort Delta next spring.
Able to have the remaining headstones here, so about a dozen, maybe a couple more, that we'll be able to get headstones ordered. And my intent is that if we do get headstones, and once they're installed, we'll have a kind of a commemorative ceremony for those veterans and the family to come in and. Yeah.
Charlotte Mort Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Wednesday was Remembrance Day and marked the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. And Sunday was Indigenous Veterans Day. And Jamie Pashagumskum brings us this story of a First Nations veteran and Indigenous rights warrior.
But anyway, I did what I was supposed to do.
98-year-old Philip Favel from the Sweetgrass First Nation in Saskatchewan is known for advocating for the rights of Indigenous veterans. This week, the World War II veteran was honored with the unveiling of his portrait. His granddaughter, Nadine, is proud of her grandfather's legacy.
Since he came back from the war, he's always had this fight in him, and that's what he's done all his life. You know, he's tried to, you know, speak up for the veterans because they weren't given the same rights as the other veterans were, and still to this day, you know, they still don't.
This was a point also brought up by AFN National Chief Perry Bellegarde.
And they were equals over there, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, equals. But when they came back, we say they became Indians again. And by that, what I mean, they didn't go to Veterans Affairs for their benefits. They went to the Department of Indian Affairs.
Veteran James Eagle was part of the project and chose Favel as the veteran to be honored.
But we're really never recognized nationally or worldly about the sacrifices that our Anishinaabe veterans, warriors, done.
During the war, Favel drove ammunition and gas to the front lines. Ottawa artist Elaine Goebel says the portrait represents an important part of Canadian history.
I am overwhelmingly touched and honored to have the opportunity not to work as an insular artist in my studio, but to work with this wonderful village that just grows and grows and is filled with so much love. It's an honor.
Goebel was commissioned for 3 copies of the portrait. One will go to Favel, another will hang in the War Museum as a tribute and as an act of reconciliation. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Great honor to see. Well, still to come, a profile of a woman who may be the only Blackfoot silversmith in Canada. Stay with us. Welcome back. Peacani silversmith is hoping to bring a different form of art to Blackfoot territory. She is currently in New Mexico exploring Navajo metalworking traditions from a Blackfoot perspective. Tamara Pimentel has this story.
It's like a treasure when you find them.
When Albertine Crowshoe was artist in residence at Calgary's Glenbow Museum, she had the chance to go through Blackfoot artifacts. What she found was mostly intricate beadwork and quill work.
We have a lot of amazing craftspeople who are beaders and who work with their hands. Well, I only found one piece of metalwork, and it was made out of tin.
Crowshoe from Peacani Nation may be the only Blackfoot silversmith in Canada. She's been a full-time jeweler since 2011.
We have a lot of our traditions and things that we need to preserve and that we need to pass on also, that can be told in the form of metalwork, silversmith.
Crowshoe spoke with APTN from Gallup, New Mexico, a place famous for its Navajo metalwork. And it's where she's expanding her knowledge of the craft with the well-known Navajo silversmith, Lyndon Sosi.
Silversmithing among Navajos is prevalent. You know, you have the basic bench jeweler or kitchen table jeweler where they set up shop on their kitchen table or their dining room table, and they make jewelry.
Crowshoe found a passion for metalwork while taking classes in Calgary. A grant from the Canada Council for the Arts brought her here.
I wanted to be able to explore Navajo silverwork from a Blackfoot perspective, from our traditions, from what we believe in, and adapt that into a metal form.
Crowshoe says she now has a responsibility to take a Navajo art form and make it prevalent in Blackfoot territory.
To keeping our ways of knowing and our ways of what we believe in, keeping those alive and teaching people and teaching those who are coming after us,
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Some really wild pieces of art there. A virtual festival addressing climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic is set to take place with guest speakers from Alaska to California. The festival, called What Works, will feature prominent Indigenous leaders and artists from British Columbia. Lee Wilson has more.
Building off the success of a festival hosted in Alaska last year, Ian Gill, co-founder of Salmon Nation, the organization behind the festival What Works, says they transitioned virtually, trying to reach people across borders during the pandemic. Guest speakers will share their solutions on both climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic.
What actually is going on out there in the world that people can exchange ideas about and learn from each other and share and collaborate and maybe invest together in solutions. And then the other thing about the festival is we've got some great music coming, we've got some authors and interviews with really good writers, we've got entertainment.
There will be music performances and food preparation tutorials, as well as a diverse group of entrepreneurs, artists, and Indigenous leaders, sharing their thoughts and discussions on a wide range of topics.
How do you actually launch a business in COVID and climate change times? How do you launch a business in the unceded territories of Indigenous communities that involves them and actually employs Indigenous people or even includes them as investors and everything else? So how do we actually follow through on these commitments like the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People to actually involve Indigenous people in any development that goes forward?
The festival is set to take place November 15th to 22nd. Salmon Nation is hoping the event can generate ideas that help reset our relationships with nature.
Tell us your stories. It's an invitation for people to sort of think differently and then start to contribute to a different narrative about who we are, where we are, and how we're going to sort of survive. And not just survive, hang on against the pandemic or hang on against climate change, that if the human species is going to thrive, and there's everything we need to live well is in this bioregion.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
And that is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and never miss a story by downloading the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.